You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast and check us out online at beardedtheologians.com. And you're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
So this week on the Bearded Theologians, we are going to, we were looking at Mark 9, really 33 through 37, which is part of the lectionary reading for this week. And one of the things that we were kicking around in our Making the Sausage session that we do not record for a lot of purposes. Our wives tell us not to anymore, and so we have to listen.
You're welcome.
You are welcome. Although we could easily do what other podcasts do and make that like, you have to purchase it content.
Hey, there you
go. But we don't do it that way. And so as we were reading and discussing, one of the questions that came up is children in worship. And Jesus talks about that in the scripture reading. And so, Zach, as we were reading the scripture and as we were having that discussion, what were some kind of thoughts and things that came to mind to you?
Well, children in scripture seems to always be in the church news, if you will. It seems to come up on Facebook quite a bit in social media. It just takes its turn every few months or a couple times a year type of a thing. And lately, John Crisp posted a picture of this card that somebody was handed that basically said, hey, you've got children, they're being noisy, we'll escort you out, the ushers will be there in the back. And that created another huge buzz around children in church. And do they belong in church or do they not belong in church for worship and things like that? And so we come across the lectionary today, and Mark 9:35, we'll start there. He sat down and called the 12 disciples over to him and said, whoever wants to be first must take last place and be the servant of everyone else. Then he put a little child among them, taking the child in his arms, and he said, anyone who comes with little children like this on my behalf welcomes me, and anyone who welcomes me welcomes not only me, but also my Father who sent me. And so when there's just this long running of debate. Do kids belong in worship? Do they need to go out to children's time, or children's church? Or do they belong there among the adults, if you will? And the answer is yeah. Kids absolutely belong in worship. Who are we to say as adults, as people, as whomever, who gets to sit and worship? If we start limiting it to children, who else do we limit it to? But what better place for kids to learn? I mean, as someone who has 3 kids that sit and worship, I get it. They're not always the best. Sometimes they're loud. Sometimes they make noise, but they're always listening. Even to me, someone they have to listen to all the time and get tired of listening to all the time, and sit through at least 2 services on a Sunday. But there's always something my kids do. They always listen, whether you think they are or not. I was doing children's message the other day, and we were talking about, what do you believe in? And I just simply asked that question to our kids. And I said, what do you believe in? And I got Santa Claus, and I got the Easter Bunny, and I got, my mom and dad. I got all these really good, cute answers. And Ryan, my 5-year-old, was talking to another 5-year-old right beside her. They were talking and playing. And, in the middle of talking and playing, she stopped and she looked at me and she said, I believe in Jesus. And then she turned back to her friend and started talking to her friend again. And they're listening. Kids are truly, truly listening. And I've had just countless stories of doing these things with, children's time in worship, or with my own kids or whatever. They pull little nuggets of that out. And if we remove them from the room and we remove their parents from the room, why even invite them to come into the space?
So one of the things I've been looking at lately, as I've just been studying and looking, I think one of the biggest struggles that we have in our society today is that we have people who are aren't willing to share their whys and why they share their faith. And
Mm-hmm.
we're really bad about it with our children. And
Yeah.
when we have moments of spiritual crisis or moments of, we just don't do it. And so like, I'm struggling with that. I'm thinking, with my children, I'm trying to talk about why I do what I do, and my faith, and I've noticed that that's helped the girls grow in their faith, be able to express their faith. And the other day, like this was like right before bedtime, I think on Sunday night, and Emily came into my room really, really excited. She's like, "Daddy, yeah, yeah." And I was like, "What?" It's like, we were watching Cinderella, and at the end of Cinderella, Cinderella forgave her stepmother, like you talk about like you've been talking about forgiveness these 3 weeks in service. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I didn't ever expect her to connect with that. Like, to make that connection shows that we're actually at least maybe doing something right with faith. And what really kind of scares me a little bit is when these conversations of children in worship come up, because I always think of this verse, and that's what's kind of crazy. Whoever welcomes one of these children in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me isn't actually welcoming me, but rather the one who sent me.
Right.
And if we're going to grow the church, because I know that that's like a big thing, and I know that that's like the empire idea of like having this like huge mega church versus actually building relationships. And that's a whole other podcast for a whole other time. But if we're going to do it right, we've got to welcome children in, and we've got to show them, we've got to have them be a part of worship. I always believe that if you want to grow your worship service, and you have the people on the stage that you want to have in the pews. And so finding ways for young people to be involved, and that's children and youth, and it's not just being acolyte. One of the coolest things that we did in the first church that I served was, and this was done by the church, this was done before I got there, this wasn't something I put into practice, was the children took up the offering. The older children, the older like elementary age children took up the offering. And there was nothing more powerful than that, watching the children take up the offering. And then, watching our person in the back help them kind of understand how to take it, and then when it's time to go. And then there are other ways. I mean, we have kids that can read, and I mean, we do a disservice when we don't include them on the stage, and more than just the children's moment. Like I don't like children's moments. I'm going to be honest.
I don't either.
I think it, I just have a hard time with them, because I don't feel like, it's not valid teaching in way that, like.
Right. Well, it's that time that we get to bring the kids up front and be really cute and tell a cute story, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I don't know, it's sometimes an afterthought of worship. It's, oh yeah, I got to do this too, right? But and yeah, so well, and I think it's undermining the kids' intelligence too. That well, they're not smart enough to understand the sermon, and so we need to dumb it down for them, right?
Well, and I don't know, there's just things that I just can't. I just have a hard time with.
Right.
That's me.
Right.
So like what I found interesting about this reading today, it's not that Jesus predicting his death. And if you want to hear about that, we'll talk about that probably some other time in like a distant podcast.
Right.
But what I found interesting, so they were going to Capernaum, they entered into this house, and Jesus like, what are you all talking about? Like, really, what's going on? What are you all talking about? And leading this whole other discussion, and Jesus uses that moment of servanthood for teaching. And so, I don't know, I just found that interesting that like they were trying to talk about one thing, and it led him into a whole different place.
Jesus is great about these full circle conversations, right? One of the things when I got it a lot when I was a youth pastor, but it was more of the, why aren't your youth coming to church type of a question. But when I was a campus director, campus ministry director, I got it all the time. Every church that I'd go visit and guest preach in, he always asked me, why won't young people, whether it's youth or young adults, come to church? And my simple answer was always, did you let them come to church when they were kids? Or did you bring them in and then usher them right back out? And it's one of those deals where, we bring them in here and then we immediately make them leave. And in a sense, telling them, you're not welcome in here until we say you are, until we're ready for you to be here. And that's the thing that Jesus is getting at here. Look, it's not this or that, it's everyone, right? And when you welcome the littlest of these, right? When you welcome children, people that traditionally we deem unworthy or not ready or incapable of understanding until we're ready for you to. When you welcome those, when you welcome all people of any age, of any place, you're welcoming me. And I think that's the thing that we got to remember. Not just for children, but for anyone we welcome into worship.
Right. And I think that's kind of one of the struggles that most churches have, is having that. We say that we welcome everybody, and then you just like look around and you say, well, I don't really see it.
Yeah.
And I know that's hard. I mean, I know it's not something that can be easily done, but I really do believe in that. If we can have that mindset that whoever we may be welcoming may be Jesus,
right?
It does change our perspective a little bit. And so I think that's a good, I think that's a good reflection, thinking about how not only in worship, or not only into the church, but into our lives.
Yeah.
Today, this afternoon, I'll probably be, around town and just thinking about what are some opportunities I may have to share my faith in a way that, may be life-changing for someone. And we have to be open to those opportunities, because we never know. And we can even table the first must be least conversation later. I'm just looking back at this, because that could be a whole other podcast, because I don't know, like I said, I'll table that one for later. I'll put that back in the memory race for later. But I think for this week, I encourage you to look in your church. If you attend church on Sunday morning or online, or however you attend church, look at your church and ask, does it reflect a community that you want to be a part of? And if it doesn't, find out ways that maybe you can help affect that change. Either sitting down with the pastor and saying, hey, I want to be able to have our church to be more welcoming to whomever. And I think that this could look like this, and be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Because, it's interesting, like we look at the story and Jesus sees that there was a problem and he's addressing the problem, but the problem really wasn't what really needed to be addressed. The problem was this focus on how we're welcoming and how we're treating people. And Jesus institutes the idea of being a true servant. And so I think far too often in our churches, conflict arises when we want our way and we're not willing to like look at the bigger picture and help the church move forward. It takes dialogue and conversation and compromise. Like,
it does.
I can't tell you how many times, like, when we finally reach that point of compromise, like something actually gets done, and we have to let go of some of the things that we want to help the church of the better. And so,
well, and that's the thing. It's coming with this awareness of, here's what I see. What are you going to do about it? It's not that. It's, here's what I see. How can we go about this together? What can I do? How can I help move this forward? Because it can't just be on your pastor. It can't just be on your church leadership. We're all in this together, especially when we look around our church and look around our lives and see the people around us. How can I change this? How can I help our church be better, be more welcoming, be this or that?
And so it means being a servant. It means being welcoming, and it means being able to embrace God in ways that you never thought imaginable. So this week, I think a good challenge for this week is looking at that and asking yourselves, how are we being a welcoming church?
I think that's great. Well, as you take a look at that and take a look at the rest of your week, we would invite you to check out beardedtheologians.com. We have some really great blogs up. We've got some more coming up in the next few weeks. Don't forget to check those out. Our blog writers have been great and will continue to do so. While you're there, click on the little Buy Our Stuff link. Christmas is coming up soon. Everybody needs a brand new Bearded Theologians coffee mug or t-shirt or a stack of stickers, whatever you need to do there. And we'd also like to invite you to check out all of our social media pages, the things that we're doing there, have the conversation with us, and certainly download the podcast on whatever device you use. And if you haven't started using CastBox, our official, unofficial partner, we'd love for you to download that app and download the podcast on there. What's great about it is you can subscribe and it'll tell you exactly when the podcast is out, but you can also leave comments there as well. And so if you leave some comments on CastBox, we will read them on our next podcast. And there's some pretty great ones up already. I mean, let me tell you, those comments are stellar. they might be from me. I don't know.
It doesn't count if they're from both of us.
We want to thank you for listening and being in conversation with us, and being in conversation with the people in your community, wherever that may be. And for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Zach Bechtold.
I'm Matt Franks.
Thanks for checking us out.
We hope you've enjoyed the conversations that we've had today on the Bearded Theologians Beardcast, and we'd encourage you to continue those conversations online at beardedtheologians.com or on our Facebook page. We also hope that you pick up a couple of coffee mugs to satisfy your coffee mug collection. Have a good day.